Now, 2012 is an important year for Taiwan, for the United States too. There's this small contact sport called politics that people are playing. And in Taiwan, you had a very long, but not as long as an American campaign. A lot of money was spent. A lot of households were visited. There were actually a series of relatively interesting presidential debates, and the vote was cast. Now, I haven't polled every table here, but I suspect that a strong number here paid very close attention to both the campaign and the outcome. Maybe even several of you went back and participated in events. And that is one of, I think, the great blessings of coming and getting to know friends in these associations. Because like you, I've gone back and seen these episodes year after year. Now, by definition in an election, if it goes the way it's usually supposed to, someone wins and others don't. And those who don't, not very happy. And so there might be a few people here who were for the side that won, and maybe a few people here who were for the side that lost. Most frequently, I hear questions, though, about where does Taiwan democracy go from here? Because in the United States, in terms of policy, most people just consider Taiwan to already be a democracy. It's done. What more is there to talk about? It's already free. You have a prosperous society, well-educated. You have elections that people don't really question the outcome of, except in 2004. And you have generally a good relationship with almost anyone in the world, minus diplomatic recognition. So, what's the problem? You have a democracy. It's all okay. But those of you who have come and gone over the years know that that is not the case. As everyone would be familiar, democracy is a process. It is something that we do in order to interact between citizens and government. It's constant. There's change, there's struggle, there's competition. There's no such thing as sort of standing still and having a status quo in politics, or really in Taiwan's relations with the world. And so, to me, as I've looked at these contests, there's been far too much attention paid to who cast how many votes for what candidate. But there are critical institutions in Taiwan that need further reform, further development. I don't say this to be critical. I think it's a fact of life in every country. But somehow in Taiwan, people have focused on the presidential system, even though Taiwan has a mixed government system, but not so much pressure on having reform of the legislature, not so much pressure on having reform of the judiciary, not so much pressure on looking at institutions in the society, like media or others, about what their role is in politics and in your everyday life. So I think when we think of a democratic process, it needs to be a more comprehensive concept. And in that regard, Taiwan still has a way to go. There are very few people who would come and go to Taiwan and say, as Fox News has made famous the slogan, that the coverage is fair and balanced. There are media organizations that intensely favor one side in Taiwan. And when it comes to looking at the judicial process, I wouldn't go so far as to say it favors one party or the other, but some of you might. There are very few young people in Taiwan who really understand what the judicial process is, until it's too late, if you should have the misfortune of being on the wrong side of the judicial process. I have been frankly dismayed at watching some of the prosecutions that unfold in Taiwan's process. It's all done according to the Constitution, but I am amazed that really more than 20 years since the end of martial law and opening into the democratic era, that there hasn't been more reform of the judicial process to make it more consistent with what young people would imagine is a modern judicial process. You have millions of people in Taiwan who grow up thinking that they live in something close to law and order on television. Taiwan's process is very different. So I think that there's a way to go. Now, some of this was at stake in 2012. I don't believe that elections mark the complete end of democracy or the beginning of something else. It's part of the continuum. I know that I had some very, very good friends who were afraid that if President Ma won re-election, that Taiwan democracy was over. Taiwan as we know it is over. I respect that they have the feeling, but to me, there is a tremendous amount of energy in Taiwan democracy still. So I'll take a moment and talk a little bit about 2012, but then I'll move quickly into trying to look into where things appear to be going in the future. Now, there were a few things that were very unusual in the 2012 presidential election in Taiwan. First, the timing was changed. You have a very unusual gap of having a January presidential election and a May inauguration. It is the longest of any modern democracy. Although there is continuity in the election result, if there hadn't been continuity in the election result, there would have been a lot of questions about how do you have that long of a transition. It's not like it was in old days in the United States when a president might have to get on a train in Illinois to come to Washington, D.C. to be president. If the election result had come in, Tsai Ing-wen would have to move from Taipei to Taipei, and it wouldn't take 5 months to do that. And so there could potentially have been some institutional questions about how that process would unfold. There were other issues at play. Number one, the United States voted in your election. I don't know if you noticed, but technically there weren't any ballots cast. But the government of the United States made a very clear opinion in terms of what it saw as a preferred outcome. Now, I have spent a fair amount of my life in different roles in the United States government. Part of me feels perfectly comfortable with picking a side, but usually picking the side is one that is for those who are seeking freedom versus, say, an unelected government. But when it's sort of a competition between parties in an open contest, we should probably be a little bit more cautious, unless one of those parties, say, wanted to declare war against the United States, supported terrorism, or something extreme. But in Taiwan, I think we should have been a little bit more cautious about sending these kind of signals. The fact that the White House chose to have a direct leak to the international media on the same day after a private meeting with a presidential candidate, I thought was disgraceful. It was also unprofessional and unnecessary. But there we have it. Before the election was held, there was a prominent American former official who spoke in Taiwan. He has a little bit more hair than I do, but I could be mistaken for him, perhaps. But he, Mr. Paul, decided to speak on his own, but as if for the United States government, suggesting that the 92 consensus was absolutely essential and that the vote needed to go a certain way, otherwise there was this risk of uncertainty. Well, that I thought also was unprofessional and unnecessary. The people of Taiwan should be wise enough and informed enough to make their own decision. They don't need sort of crazy white guys from the United States to show up and tell them what the results of, what the implications will be for the election. And I thought that that was an unfortunate, unnecessary meddling in a free campaign for the presidency of Taiwan. China voted in the election too. I don't know if you noticed those ballots. But China voted by facilitating the travel back to Taiwan of the business leaders who were willing to listen to what Big Brother had to say. And if you didn't, then maybe your flight was inconvenienced. Or maybe the seats were full on the flight you wanted. Or maybe you didn't get the good discount. Now, I'm sure that there is no way to point to a directive that WikiLeaks will share with all of us to say, here is what came from Zhongnanhai saying, you know, you are approved to go home and vote and you are not. But there is a subtle form of signal sending, usually that has to do with whether the electricity in your factory turns on today. That lets you know whether you're on the right side of the signal sending and receiving. And so China did vote in the Taiwan election too. So those, I think, are some fairly unfair odds if you want to have a free and fair election. When Uncle Sam speaks very forcefully on one side and Uncle Hu across the way makes his view clear about where things should be headed. But the fact of the matter is that the fundamental challenge for Taiwan leaders is to inspire their youth and to give their people confidence that what they have to offer will benefit the people and the country. And when it comes down to it, in this race, Chairwoman Tsai made enormous progress from 2008 till 2012, but she did not make a sufficient case for change. She did not convince enough people in Taiwan that she had clear ideas that would benefit them more than would the status quo in government in Taiwan. And that is the challenge of running against an incumbent. She needed to make that case. Apparently, that case was not made strongly enough. And so, yes, there were these external factors. Yes, it's not fair. But fundamentally, it still came down to a choice for the Taiwan people. And so in 2016, there's going to have to be another contest. And the measure there is going to have to be a competition for what are the building blocks for a competitive Taiwan in the face of unfair competition from across the sea. And what will it take to inspire young people of Taiwan who have lived their entire life after martial law has been lifted? They have lived there, probably in all of their memory, they know about presidents who have been elected. They don't necessarily feel as if they live under threat or fear. And they shouldn't feel like they live in the era that others will recall from the past. And I remember walking around towns in Taiwan where the Xianding, the MPs, would march down the street every day. So you would see literally a show of force almost everywhere you went. And the airplanes would have exercises, and for an American coming from small town, and you show up and you're walking around what you think is a small town, and you hear a couple of fighter jets go overhead, it gets your attention. And gives you a sense of a different security environment. Kids today do not grow up that way. They grow up in what they see as relative wealth and freedom and opportunity. And your leaders are going to have to find a way to connect with them on issues of identity, issues of values, and finding a way to organize to pursue a common future together. That's an enormous challenge. I don't think it will be successful to try to have them rooted in the history that is the struggle for freedom. They should know it. But